Welcome to Delaware County Political News. We are here with Claude Falcone of the Marple Newtown Democrats. Claude has been the chair for the past 3 years. He grew up with politics. His father was the Democratic chairman of the Delaware County Democratic Party in the 60s and 70s. He worked as teacher in Philadelphia and Bucks County for 20 years. He served for 5 years as broadcast journalist in the United States Army. He spent the rest of his 20-year military career as a citizen soldier in the United States Army Reserves and Pennsylvania National Guard. Claude is now a retired teacher who lives in Newtown Square with his family and is currently running for Township Supervisor in Newtown Township, Delaware County. Claude, what got you into politics?
Well, part of it was that my father was in politics, and I was sort of forced to do this as a kid. I went around the doors, I worked at the polls, and it was kind of annoying to me after a while, and I got totally out of it because, I got sick of all the grime of politics. But after I retired, I thought, hey, I have time to do this, and because of my interest in progressive points, I felt like I really had to get back involved again.
And I see that you got the job is Democratic chairman of the Marple Newtown Democratic Party. How'd that happen?
Well, what happened was Tony Campisi worked for about 20 years as the Democratic chairman of Marple Newtown Democratic Committee. He brought the two townships together. Because of the smallness of each committee, it was determined that it would be much better to have one larger committee. And I agree. I think we should stay to that. I got involved because Tony did it for 20 years, and quite frankly, he burned out on it. He had victories and some losses, and now I'm in a position to gain more victories again.
What are the duties of a chairman of a township political party?
Well, there is very little glamour involved with this. It's a lot of nuts and bolts. You got to make sure you have people. You got to make sure that they get out and work at the polls. You got to make sure that you have coverage inside the polls. You got to raise money for the party. We're usually outspent about 7 or 8 times to 1 by the Republicans because they have so much money.
7 to 8 times to 1. Claude, isn't that conservative?
I think it's probably conservative considering that there's usually one check from contractors that counts as our annual budget. And
so what else? What other duties would be involved?
Well, having meetings. You have to have meetings once a month if possible. We also have 4th of July parade. We have summer picnics, and we have a Christmas party. We do things all year round. It's also maintaining a database to make sure that people are contacted, keeping an on-site type of presence with mndems.com, and also doing Facebook, and just trying to make sure our message gets out to the community.
So if someone wants information about the township, what is available on mn.com?
mndems.com includes information about our upcoming events. It includes who our candidates are, when our meetings are. It also says go to Facebook for current news. We tend to have more up-to-date current news on our Facebook page.
And you also went through a lot of the duties that you have throughout the year. How about Election Day? What's involved with the chairman on Election Day?
On Election Day, it's kind of like you're the utility baseball player. You go around and make sure that everything's happening properly. If there's a problem at any of the precincts, you go there and you fix the problem. Sometimes I end up handing out literature. I go in and work and give people a break. It's all a matter of whatever needs to be done. But you can't just start on Election Day. You have to start weeks in advance, maybe months in advance, to make sure that people will show up, that you have groups of people. During a primary, it's critical that you have people to hand out literature, the greeters. They're the outside people. They're the face of our party. When each precinct voter comes in to vote, they see our greeter. And so they say, hello, how you doing? Would you like a Democratic piece of literature? Or more or less, it's a guide to who's going to be a Democrat. During these off years, there are Democrats and Republicans voting. So it's critical that the voters get a sample ballot so they know who the Democrat is.
All right, let's talk about that, who the Democrat is. If Marple Newtown Dems endorsed a candidate, What was involved in that process to endorse a candidate?
Well, first we try to get some information about that person, why they want to run. We do an interview. Um, we want people to fill the slots. It's critical that we have somebody running so that the voters get an opportunity to vote for a Democrat. We don't always have candidates. It's a very difficult position for us to be in because our registration is against us, 2-1 in Marple, almost 2.5-1 in Newtown. So we can't always get people to run. But you want them to submit a resume, and you speak to them, and you find out what they're all about and why they want to run, and then we support them, or we don't. But generally, we do support people that want to come out and run and take that opportunity.
Now, you did mention that the registration is against you. 2-1 Republicans in favor to two Republicans to 1 Democrat. So what difficulties have you encountered as chair of the Marple Newtown Committee?
Well, mainly it's getting out the vote. If we get out the vote, we can win. Because on off-year elections in particular, people don't tend to show up to vote. It might be 15, 20% turnout. If we can get 80 or 90% of our Democrats coming out to vote, we'll be able to win these elections. So mainly it's getting out the vote. It's knocking on people's door beforehand, going door to door, saying, look, please come out and support our candidates, support your candidates, so that we have a fighting chance to win this thing.
And I understand that your father was the Democratic Party county chair.
Yes, he was. In the 60s and the 70s, he was the county chairman. But first, he was the first Democrat elected in Marple Township as a commissioner back in the 60s.
So during the time that he was chair, how old were you?
I was a little kid. I was, between 4 and 12. He did it for about, I guess, from the 60s to the 70s, approximately, I think he did it for about 14 years. So I was a kid most of the time.
All right, now,
and a young teen.
Sure. What do you remember about observing him in action during those days?
Well, he broke his collarbone, so he tended to be hunched over, and he would put his finger in your chest and make sure you're looking at him in the eye, and he'd tell you what he thought politics were all about. And I said, well, Dad, what if they have a different idea? He said, well, then I educate them. He's a funny guy.
And what did you take that to mean?
Well, he was a highly educated man. He went to Princeton, and he knew what he was doing. He was a political science major at Princeton, and he just really could convince people. He could get into them, talk to them. If he talked to them, he could probably convince them to vote his way. And he was able to win. At one point, Marple became Democrat for a short amount of time.
Do you have any specific recollections of watching him carrying petitions or anything like that?
Oh, well, yes, absolutely. Because of some issues with the Republican Party in Delaware County, for example, they will break into our office, our headquarters. My father refused to change the locks on the doors. I said, Dad, how come this is broken? Why don't you lock this? He goes, why should I lock it? I'll just buy a new one when they break in again. And what he did is he usually took the petitions and put them in the trunk of his car. And that's where he stored them because he knew they would be stolen out of the headquarters.
So any other stories? You remember seeing him at the Timbers Inn, Claude?
Well, right. As a matter of fact, they would have a lot of their events there. And at one point, I was told this secondhand because I wasn't there, that he was interested in, in supporting Milton Schaap for governor in 1970. And I heard some stories about that. I also heard stories about presidents coming around and visiting Delaware County. Delaware County is an important county for presidential candidates because if you win Philadelphia and the surrounding suburbs and Allegheny County, you win the state generally. That's what happens. So when Lyndon Johnson came around in 1964 after he won the election, he said, Ernani, because my father's name was Ernani, which is the name of an Italian opera. And he goes, Ernani, let me meet some of these people. And Lyndon Johnson was a big guy with big hands. So he grabbed my father's hand, and my father thought that he's going to break his hand because he's dragging him around the room. Let me meet these Democrats. And, that was his introduction to Lyndon Johnson.
And did he ever receive a call from the Kennedys?
The Kennedys would call occasionally. Birch Bayh, who was a senator from Indiana, would call. Biden would call. Joe Biden would call when he was a young man, actually, at that point. And at one point, I pick up the phone and I hear that, is your father home? And I said, no, he's not here. He said, well, can you take a message? This was Teddy Kennedy. And I said, yeah, I'll take a message. I was like 8 years old. I pretended like I was taking the message. I didn't take the message, though. So I'm sure he got back to him.
So, Claude, what did you learn from these stories about Delaware County? First, the petitions, and then the fact that these presidents called your father.
Well, it was just an interesting amount of time. It was almost like Forrest Gump. You're there, and all this stuff is happening. But it's a matter of power. It's a matter of seeing how people can get involved and people can do things. It's seeing how corrupt actually the Republican Party is in Delaware County because they controlled the show. We received a lot of threatening phone calls. There was a lot to pay for because my father was so involved. As a matter of time away from the family, that sort of thing. But overall, it was a very positive experience in retrospect.
Claude, you're running for commissioner. What issues are going to be involved in the 2017 race?
Well, mainly I look at my community in Newtown Square and say this is low. They consider themselves to be lower main line, and people expect that certain services will be provided. Well, that's not really happening. For example, our recycling, they come around once every 2 weeks. That recycling ought to be there every week. They're talking about bringing around a larger can. We don't need a larger can. We need recycling every week. I don't know about you, but when I take my trash out, only about a quarter is garbage and the rest is recycling. So we need better recycling. The roads need to be...
On the recycling, let me ask you, Claude,
yes.
in Nether Providence, we have private contractors that do our trash. Does the township take up your recycling and your trash, or do you have private contractors that do it?
They contract to pick up the recycling, but we have to contract to pick up our garbage.
So in other words, it's a county service that does that.
It's actually the township contracts to get a trash company to come around and pick up our recycling, and we have to get our trash through. There are about 6 different companies.
So the township does it, but they're only doing it every other week.
Well, in townships, you have to understand, Marple is a first-class township. Newtown is a second-class township, and some of the services aren't provided. In Marple, they pick up your trash. That's part of your taxes. In Newtown, you contract for it.
Claude, actually, that brings us to an interesting point. What's the difference between a first-class township and a second-class township?
Well, a first-class township has a board of commissioners. Newtown Township has a board of supervisors. It's 6-year terms for the supervisors, and if you go over to Marple Township, it's 4-year terms for the commissioners. And there's a couple, it's basically the same jobs are being done. There's different names, there's different terms.
All right, so I interrupted you. You already said one issue is insufficient recycling services. What else is involved in your race?
Well, in my race, I'm looking at one is recycling. Also, the roads. It seems as though the roads are very congested. I believe that there should be throughways. There should be methods of picking up the traffic. I think a lot of it can be done by coordinating the lights along Westchester Pike so that people can just go directly through Newtown Township and don't have to stop. It's kind of like West Philadelphia years ago, where you could go 35 miles an hour and get through the town. Now, one way, 252, because it's basically a T. 252 could be an issue, but I think, one way or the other, people should be able to shoot through without stopping. That's one of the issues. Also, cleaning up the community and protecting our open spaces is critical because it's all being developed, and it seems like it's got a very heavy corporate hand. A lot of our small businesses are shutting down, and I don't think that's necessary. I think that we should be giving them tax breaks so that they can stay. We need to work in order to keep local flavor that we've had in the past. Just recently, the True Value closed down. Mackey's Pharmacy shut down within the last year or so, and it's losing. Newtown is losing its particular identity because of that.
What is the makeup of the board right now that sits in Marple and Newtown?
Well, both are solid Republican. We have nobody elected on the school board. We have nobody elected in on the commissioners board and nobody elected in the supervisors. And we need to change that. We need to end one party rule. Just having an alternative point of view, I think, is very important and critical to a healthy democracy.
Sure. When's the last Democrat to have sat on either board, school board, or commissioner or supervisor?
There have been a few Democrats that were elected to school board, but it was usually a mistake because of the cross-filing. People don't realize what's going on, and we got people in that way. Very seldom do we actually elect a Democrat to the school board. To the commissioners were under Democratic control in about 2007, as of 2007, but they lost, and that was that, and they went back to being purely Republican. In Newtown, we've never had a Democrat elected. We've had a Republican become a Democrat, but that's it.
And Claude, what problems do you see if there's one-party rule? Why is that a problem at the township level?
Well, I'm sure it's not a problem for the folks in charge because they're able to get all kinds of sweetheart deals. They can put their friends in as solicitor. They can collect legal fees that way. Also, you can have no-bid contracts. You decide what the contracts are. They can go to your friends. And this is the sort of thing that happens at the county level, and it happens at the township level also.
And if you have more balance, then what do you have?
If you have more balance, you open up the democracy to more people's involvement. You're able to actually get people to come out and have a choice, as opposed to the same old, same old.
And competition.
Yeah, competition. Well, a lot of people are happy. They say, well, we don't really get bothered. Things don't really bother us unless something happens, and then suddenly they're up in arms and they're going to the meetings. They find out that maybe the zoning has been changed across the street from them, that maybe you can put in a 5-story office complex across from somebody's house. Then they start showing up at the meetings. They put an Uno in, and suddenly they smell meat and different food all day, all night. And, that bothers them. They suddenly show up at the meetings. But nobody bothers to go out and do things unless their ox is being gored.
And how often do you see that people are coming out after the fact, after a negative change occurs?
People come out and go to school board meetings when they find out that elementary school art and music teachers are being cut. Then they'll show up. There was a situation with a music teacher who was cut, and very beloved, and so they came out, the community came out and showed up to the meetings. And that's the sort of thing. If there's an issue that affects people personally, then they show up.
Claude is someone who has run for office before. You did run 2 years ago for office. What did you run for 2 years ago?
I ran for supervisor at that time also.
All right. Please share with our listeners what is involved in running for office. What's ahead for you in 2017, and what work is involved?
Well, it's surprisingly easy to get on the ballot. You really only need 10 signatures. We usually try to double that and even get more after that so that you can get on the ballot. After you get on the ballot, that's when the hard work actually begins. You need to knock on doors. There's no excuse for not doing the hard work, which is communicating with people, creating a rapport with people as you go door to door, finding out what people really want in the community. And that also helps you to develop your points that you're going to be running on.
Claude, suppose someone wants to get involved, and they're shy. Suppose someone wants to volunteer for a campaign, but that's not. They're thinking to themselves, you know what? This door knocking isn't for me. I'm an introvert, and I can't go to that door. What else is? And suppose they want to volunteer and help for a campaign like yours. What else? How else can people get involved in local politics? Do you need volunteers?
We always need volunteers. As a matter of fact, there's different offices that people can run for. You can be a clerk during election day. You can be a voter inspector where you check people in. You can run as there's many jobs that you can do that don't really entail being particularly partisan. But the more partisan job is being the greeter at the door, handing out the literature when people come in. In the primary you ask, are you a Democrat or are you Republican? Or you try to be as inoffensive as possible and say, would you like a Democratic ballot? when they come in through the door. But there are many jobs that people can do. They can go help us out on the 4th of July parade. They can be involved with a picnic committee. They can work for the county. There's many opportunities, volunteer opportunities.
I'm actually putting the cart before the horse and saying, but you're a chairman and you're a candidate. Are volunteers needed? What type of help are you looking for?
Well, like I said before, it's somebody to walk around with you, going door to door. That's one thing. You can always use monetary help. People can contribute to the party. I happen to be running through the Democratic Party in Marple Newtown, and so they can send a check. That helps. Like I said, we're really outgunned monetarily. So if somebody sends a check, it's always welcomed.
And Claude, you also mentioned something about a 4th of July parade. What does the Marple Newtown Democrats do for that?
Well, we're trying to get our brand out. As you can see behind me, it says Vote Democratic. We're interested in saying, look, it's great to be a Democrat. It's good to be a Democrat. When people ask me, do you want to be a Republican? I said, no. I believe in very little that the Republican Party has to offer at the national and the local level. So to be involved in the 4th of July parade is the face of our party, getting out, waving, handing out candy, going down Westchester Pike and handing out balloons to kids. We get our candidates to be there. We'll try to get a flatbed and decorate it. And it's usually a fun time. It's fun time is usually had by all, so to speak.
And Claude, you're the Marple Newtown Dems in that parade. However, I'm from Nether Providence, and I've been in that parade. Even when I wasn't,
Larry.
Sure. Well, even when I was invited. Even when I wasn't, even when I was not a candidate. So, is it limited to Marple Newtown Democrats?
No, actually, we have a lot of people from around the county who are involved. The Marple Newtown Parade is the largest parade in the county on 4th of July, and there's usually about 20,000 people along the parade route, and it's always a lot of fun.
What else is involved in running for office throughout a local election other than door knocking?
Well, there's working at the polls. There's also phone calls. We try to call people. We try to do strike lists when we have the personnel. A strike list was when you go in and you find out who voted because you've got the documentation to do that. You strike the name off the list of the person who voted. Generally, you want to knock on that person's door well in advance to make sure they're going to vote for you. Then you double check to make sure they come out and vote. That's called a strike list.
All right, and that's election day. How about throughout?
That's also beforehand, though. It's also beforehand because it's important to make sure that those people know when the election is and that they are actually going to get out and vote. A lot of people don't like to vote in primaries. Well, in this particular primary, somebody can actually be elected in the primary if there's no opposition in the fall.
So in other words, a big part of running for office is some type of list, a voter list that the candidate has provided, and that you actually reach out to the voters in your particular area individually.
Absolutely. Being a committee person is a very important job. It's the building block of the Democratic Party or any party. You go out and you know who the people are in your precinct, and you communicate with them constantly. You've got to knock on doors to do that. There are people constantly moving in. You check with people that are moving in to see what their registration is. You try to convince them to be Democrats if possible. Or you might be able to give them a voter registration form.
Claude, you bring up a good point. I was asking you about a candidate, but you mentioned that there's maybe some overlap between what a candidate is doing in outreaching to a voting public and what a committee person does. Let me ask you, what is the role of a committee person in Marple Newtown or the rest of the county? What does a committee person do?
Committee people are responsible for actually communicating with their precinct. They make sure that there are, for example, 2 committee people in each precinct. They can find somebody to help out. I mean, it's my job ultimately, but they can help find somebody because they're supposed to know their precincts better than anyone else. They're the bottom building block of the Democratic Party. They're the first line. They go around with candidates sometimes. Sometimes they go around alone. If they're new to being a committee person, they want to introduce themselves to every one of their constituents or their local Democratic voters.
And Claude, do you, in the Marple Newtown Committee, have a complete committee?
No, we don't. My policy is to make sure that people are actually going to work a little bit for me before I just say, okay, you're a committee man because you worked one time at the polls. I like people to work for at least 2 elections and show that they have interest. Come to some of our meetings. They don't have to go to every meeting, but I like them to show up to a few of our meetings. That shows me that they have an interest in actually being a committee man. I've given it to people in the past, and it hasn't panned out. I need active committee people. To be active, you really need to come to the meetings. You need to do the footwork. You need to work the elections.
All right, Claude, meetings. Tell us about a meeting. What goes on in a meeting?
Well, there are Robert's rules. You go through the Pledge of Allegiance. People, we do a report, a financial report. After the financial report, we open it up. If we have any guests, our guests will speak at that point. Then we look at issues in Marple Township and Newtown Township on the school board, and we open it up. If there's any issues that people are interested in, we open it up at the end, and they have discussions. People usually stay a lot later than the allotted time because they want to talk. They want to share their information that they know.
And what benefits are there for being a committee person, especially when I'm referring to when it's time to endorse candidates both in a township level and county level?
Well, I was voted in by the committee people in my committee to make me chairman. So that's one election. And we also elect our treasurer and our vice chairs. Because we're Marple and Newtown, we have a vice chairman in Marple and Newtown Township. Also, at the county level, the committee people can vote for the county chairman. And also, we endorse candidates. Every convention, we'll have a convention at the county level, and candidates, it's annual, and candidates are endorsed at that point.
Now, how does one become a committee person?
Well, first they have to get in touch with me and go to mndems.com and contact me if they don't already have my number. I'm constantly handing out my card. But if they don't know who I am, they go to mndems.com and there's contact information, and they get in touch with me. To become, like I said before, to become a committee person, you have to show a willingness to work a little bit. You have to work a couple of elections, and you need to show up to some meetings.
Now, anyone watching this now knows who Claude Falcone is, correct?
Hopefully.
Right. Now, Claude, what you were just describing is how you become an appointed committee person, but every 4 years, they would have an opportunity to become an elected committee person.
Well, actually, right. They run every 4 years. They do run. And you do the same thing. You get a couple of, you have to put out a petition and you run for that position. I can appoint them, though. If there's any kind of vacancy, I can appoint committee people to those vacancies.
And, Claude, I think we should point out to our listeners that now with the registration changing, I think we have an excess countywide of a 16,000 voter registration advantage, Democrat to Republican. So eventually, I don't think it's a stretch to point out to people that the Democrats will be most likely in the future endorsing candidates for judge, county council, and other row offices, again, in the very near future. And I don't think we're far away from that. Would that be a fair assessment?
I pretty much agree, Larry. I think that it's important that people know that they're not alone when they come up to vote, that they're not the only Democrats. That's why I'm trying to build a brand in Marple and Newtown Township. And voters don't feel alone. They think it's great to be a Democrat and be proud of it. It's very important that they get out and vote in every election, not just every 4 years.
And Claude, can you speak as a county Dem, the brand that the county is also trying to build?
Well, the county is trying to also build a brand by getting excellent candidates and taking over the courthouse, more or less, taking over county council. There used to be a Democrat that was on county council. There was a minority representation, and that was changed. And fortunately, so even though it's a majority, Delaware County is a majority Democrat county, there's no representation on county council.
So meaning,
that has to change.
And what you're referring to is back, I think it was in 1972 to 1976 or 1976 to 1980, there was a mandate that the minority party be represented. And if that same mandate was there, it would be that the Republicans be represented because they are now officially the minority party. Ironically, they happen to control the courthouse. Now that there's no representation for a minority party, it's dominated by one party rule, all Republicans.
Well, there used to be a slot that was left
being
for the minority, and that's gone now.
Sure.
That position is gone now. So if the Democrats win the county, there may be no Republicans on county council.
Right. So people might not be aware, people who are just starting to follow politics, that there is one party rule, and that the courthouse is 100% entirely dominated by one party, from every elected official to every employee, as far as
Absolutely.
we know. And
many of the offices are filled by political people who they're not told they have to go out and work at the polls, but a lot of the people that you do see at the polls are county employees. It's kind of an unwritten rule. If you want to have this job, you're expected to come out and work for the party, for the Republican Party. That's what they do.
Well, Claude, based upon my own experience and reporting, you mentioned that they're not told that they have to go. Tell you what, I'll do some investigative reporting on that, but my sources might be saying otherwise, that there is some responsibility that workers work, but on election day. Well, Claude, we are out of time now, but I want to thank you for appearing as a guest on my show, Delaware County Political News. We are here with Claude Falcone, the chair of the Marple Newtown Democratic Party. And I want to thank you all for listening to Delaware County Political News, the Voter Information Network. I am your host, Larry DeMarco, talking with Claude Falcone. And thanks for tuning in. And don't forget to tune in to my next show.
Thank you, Larry.